Okay, thank you again for being here. I am Bree Kruder. I am the Executive Vice President for ProLink Solutions, and I welcome you today to the first day of ProLink Technology Live 2025. This is our traditional annual user conference, and it has been held virtually now for 5 years. We have sessions with industry topics, but the primary focus of our conference is software training for our users. Plus, the event is open to all public agencies nationally, and you will have the opportunity to casually interact with your peers throughout the conference. The audience today, just to make sure you know your neighbors today. Mainly we have ProLink customers, but we also have some non-customers. We're joined by multifamily folks this year. We have designed the conference to encourage participation. Except for this session, we will have poll questions built into the sessions. And then we do have coffee and bagel, which is something be seeing on our videos when we open our sessions with a gift card opportunity to win. There will be a short video on the conference main page at the bottom of, and on the bottom of that main page, you'll see a Starbucks gift card picture. And that video explains how to participate in Coffee and Bagel. Each day we'll post the gift card winners and we'll post it to social media under ProLink Tech Live 2025. It's a hashtag, so be on the lookout for that. The session you've joined right now is titled the Keynote Washington Updates. The speakers for this session is myself and Stockton Williams, who's the Executive Director at the National Council of State Housing Agencies, or NCSAJ. Stockton's held senior leadership positions in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors throughout his career, dedicated to expanding housing and economic opportunity. Thank you, Stockton, so much for being here. Before we start the session, I'd like to take just a couple minutes to cover some housekeeping items. So first, just being on this screen, you can see we have access to chat. Just click that chat icon on the right-hand side of your screen and you can begin chatting with fellow attendees. Please feel free to post any questions or comments through the session chat, and we will try to provide responses or follow up individually after the session. Please note that your responses are visible to all attendees. Many sessions for ProLink Technology Live will have poll questions, but several will not. Okay, next is our resources. So this is where you can download a copy of the materials for each conference session that you attend. You can download it anytime before, during, or after the session. Okay, then we also wanted to inform you we're offering the recordings from previous Technology Live conferences on demand. So if you scroll down the conference platform homepage, you will see a playlist of individual sessions for both ProLink Technology Live 2024 and our 2023 conferences. These sessions are supplemental to the live sessions we're offering this year. So if there's a topic that doesn't pertain to you and you'd rather go to our on-demand playlist, you're welcome to do that. All right, and now I would like to pass things off to Stockton to kick us off. Thank you so much again for being here, Stockton. We are very appreciative of your time and look forward to hearing what you have to update us with.
Well, thank you so much, Bree. It is a pleasure to be part of this conference. As those of you who have participated in the past know, ProLink has always been kind enough to invite somebody from NCSHA to participate. And my colleague Jennifer Schwartz and I both enjoy the opportunity so much that we've gone back and forth. So this year is my turn, and I couldn't be happier. I just want to say to start, though, how much we at NCSHA appreciate ProLink, and not just the service that the company provides to so many housing finance agencies as clients, but also your incredible support for our association, for NCSHA. The company has been active for many years as a sponsor, as a participant in panel discussions at our conferences, and really as a thought leader and ally to us in all that we're doing to try to strengthen the network of housing finance agencies. So we're just incredibly grateful for that. Many of you, I hope, all of you actually, I hope, are getting at least some of the communications that NCSHA shares with housing finance agencies and their partners, especially our weekly Washington report, which is a newsletter that tries to help everyone in the housing finance agency and housing finance communities keep up with what's happening in Washington. So I'm not going to just tell you exactly what you've already heard in recent issues and what you'll read in the next several, but try to put into a little bit of a broader context some of what's going on in Washington, D.C., and really around the country that we think is particularly important, that is top of mind for housing finance agencies, and probably going to define a lot of the work that all of us do to execute the housing finance agency's mission in the next several years. So I have 6 slides after this cover slide, 3 challenges, 3 areas where we're concerned, and we know housing finance agencies and their partners are concerned for good reason, and then 3 encouraging trends that we think mitigate some of the concerns, or at least provide opportunities to think about ways to deal with them. So with the help of the crack ProLink team, I'm going to ask that we bring up the first slide. And there it is. So first big challenge that we're all dealing with is that federal agencies and programs that support affordable housing, and really all of the work of housing finance agencies, are at risk. Now, this particular slide shows the impact of the staffing reductions that the Trump administration has made since it came into office in January. And actually, this is a excerpt of a larger chart that had every single federal agency, but this part shows HUD and USDA, Department of Agriculture, and Treasury, which are certainly 3 of the most important federal agencies for the work of housing finance agencies. And what you see here is that these agencies have already made substantial reductions in their staffing levels. So, for example, HUD there on the second row expects to have 27% fewer staff in the coming year than it did in the prior year. And of course, this is not including any additional layoffs that may be made. The White House has taken some initial steps to make layoffs during this federal government shutdown that we're in, which is unprecedented, and has threatened to make more. And we'll see if some of those eventually get reversed when this shutdown finally does end. But in any event, all of the agencies across the federal government, really especially including some of the ones that are most important to housing, are going to be operating going into the next several years and beyond at much lower staffing levels. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't going to be able to execute their mission or respond in a timely manner to the needs and requests of their partners. But it certainly raises the prospect that things could slow down or become more difficult to resolve, or to get clarity on a policy or programmatic change regarding. The staffing reductions, as serious as they are and as painful as they are for the people directly involved, are really only part of what I'm getting at, though, when I talk about federal agencies and programs being at risk. We know, of course, and we've reported extensively since the Trump administration came in, that they really have a vision for a much smaller federal government, much lower levels of federal spending in virtually every area, except a couple that are particularly important to the president and this administration. And so the administration has proposed huge cuts to a number of important housing programs. In early spring, the administration proposed a budget for HUD's fiscal year 2026 that would have cut the overall amount of funding for HUD programs in half compared to prior years. And even worse, would have totally eliminated the home housing block grant as one example of an essential program that housing finance agencies and their development partners depend on. Now, the good news is that Republicans as well as Democrats in Congress really rejected some of those most draconian proposed spending cuts that the Trump administration put forward. But we do expect there will be significant pressure to reduce program funding levels over the next several years, even if They aren't as severe as the proposed cuts that the Trump administration put forward this spring. Really, every HUD and USDA and Treasury and other federal program that supports housing faces the prospect, the risk of potentially being cut. So it's a huge area of concern and one where NCSHA is working very hard. Of course, the administration has also held or clawed back or delayed the release of funding that Congress has already appropriated in lots of areas. And these include some important housing programs. So it's not just proposals to reduce funding, but also to say, even if Congress provides resources for a given program, the White House through HUD and the other federal agencies may simply not release the funds or may add additional criteria to their use. And we've seen that most recently in a very concerning development where HUD, we believe, is going to propose a significant set of changes to the main funding resources that help states and local communities deal with homelessness through their continuums of care. A lot of continuum of care resources in recent years have gone to help produce permanent supportive housing. And the administration is developing a set of policies that's going to sharply restrict the amount of continuum of care and other homeless assistance funding for permanent supportive housing. A huge change that could really challenge not only the ability of local jurisdictions to define how they want to deal with meeting homeless housing needs, but also potentially imperil financing for any number of projects in various stages of development that were underwritten and dependent upon receiving federal grant funds for a portion of the capital stack. So that's yet another dimension to this challenge. And then, of course, to the one that's in the news the most at the moment, this federal shutdown that we're in. Now, the second longest federal shutdown ever. We're on day 21. There's no resolution in sight, according to the smartest and most plugged-in observers in NCSHA's own intelligence and our terrific and well-connected team. Most people, including us, think that this shutdown will last at least until around November 1st, which is a key deadline for some of the healthcare subsidies that are one of the sticking points in getting the government reopened. But there's also a view that the government could remain closed until close to Thanksgiving. There's just a lot that still has to be done to bring the two parties together. For the first few weeks so far into the shutdown, we have not seen or heard from our Housing Finance Agency members reports of significant disruption to key funding streams or financing approvals or responsiveness to the typical daily requests and back and forth that go on with housing agencies and the local HUD field offices. But that is clearly going to become a growing concern over the next couple of weeks. And in particular, where we are most worried at the moment and focused in our advocacy efforts and conversations with Capitol Hill and members of the administration who are still working, is on the timely delivery of funding for rental assistance contracts and other operating support for public and assisted housing. These funds have so far been available and sufficient, and by all accounts that we have heard, no one's expecting any disruption or problem through the remainder of October. But going into November and certainly beyond November, if precedent and what we know about current policy is any guide, HUD is going to be extremely hard pressed to fully fund those essential lifelines to families and to projects around the country if the shutdown really drags deeply into November and beyond. So that is a major area of concern. Next slide, please. So this is a pretty information-dense slide, and I'll just summarize it for you. It comes from the Joint Center of Housing Studies at Harvard's annual must-read report, The State of the Nation's Housing, which comes out every summer and is really an incredible comprehensive picture of housing trends and data. And in this particular chart shows a critical point that we all probably know in the back of our minds, but perhaps don't always have a full understanding for the severity of. And that's just that the supply of existing affordable apartments has just plummeted in recent years. So there's a lot on this slide, but essentially what it shows is a snapshot 2013, 2019, and 2023 for the number of apartments around the country that were available in those years at various rent levels, under $600, between $600 and $1,000, and so on. And the upshot of the data that this chart summarizes is that we have lost millions of apartments over the last 10 years that are affordable to rents of $600 and less, and millions more that were affordable to renters at under $1,000. So, quintessentially affordable housing, under $1,000 a month, under $600 a month. The net supply in the country is 3.5 to 5 million units lower now than it was 5 years ago. And you think, geez, we've built a lot of affordable housing and we've done a lot of good work in preservation, and the private market produces some so-called Class B, unsubsidized affordable units every year. All that's true, but it's still getting swamped by the losses to the stock that are affordable to the people that housing finance agencies and all their partners serve in terms of rental multifamily apartments. There's a subset, of course, of multifamily apartments that we pay particular attention to, and that's what we call the federally subsidized or the federally assisted stock. This is about 5 million units nationwide. That includes public housing, HUD-assisted housing, low-income housing, tax credit financed housing. This is really where federal policy is sort of the most directly involved in this universe of 5 million or so rental apartments. And there too, we see worrisome trends, not the kinds of losses right away that we're seeing broadly that are reflected in this chart, but work that's been done by the National Housing Preservation Database suggests that affordability restrictions, meaning essentially capped rents and other affordability requirements, are set to expire over the next 5 years for something like 375,000 assisted apartments, 375,000 of the 5 million or so. So a significant share of the assisted affordable inventory is at risk of losing the statutory and regulatory protections that would apply to make sure those apartments remain affordable to very low and extremely low income renters. Now, just because the affordability restrictions end, as probably everyone on the webinar knows, doesn't necessarily mean that we lose a unit to much higher or market rate rents or some other scenario. And in fact, housing finance agencies and their partners have dedicated a significant amount of effort and resources to preserving the affordability of older assisted properties as they reach the end of their affordability periods. Something like a third of the financing HFAs provide every year through their low-income housing tax credits and multifamily housing bonds actually goes to preserving, extending the affordable life of existing affordable properties. And so that is a major area of focus. But back to this slide, the reality is preservation efforts and the advocacy to get new resources into older existing apartment properties, whether they were federally subsidized or not, are just being swamped by the losses and the market and other economic trends that are driving them. Next slide, please. The third big challenge that I wanted to touch on relates to new apartment construction, new affordable housing development. And the big issue here, which has been building, has been the costs, the total development costs of housing. This chart, which was developed by Novogradac from data that is provided on an annual basis to Affordable Housing Finance, really summarizes this quite well. Affordable Housing Finance does a survey every year of the 50 largest developers of low-income housing tax credit properties in the country. These firms self-report information, and then Affordable Housing Finance summarizes it and then ranks the firms based on their size and activity. The last several years, the firms in the top 50 survey have accounted for something like 40 to 45,000 new low-income housing tax credit starts per year. So a really significant share of total new construction activity financed by the low-income housing tax credit. One of the questions that the survey has asked in recent years is for the average total development cost of the starts in that year of the survey. And what this chart shows is that going into COVID in 2019 and really through the first several years of the pandemic, costs were pretty stable at a little under 310,000 a unit, and then edging up in 2022 to 330,000 a unit. But since then, through the most recent survey year of 2024, you've seen there's a huge jump. Total development costs reported by the 50 largest tax credit developers are up almost by 1/3 just over the last 3 years. And so that's really a significant jump, average in this particular group, most recently 436,000, which, some of you in the highest cost markets are thinking, gosh, I would love to be able to do that per door, in my program. Others of you would be surprised that it would be so high. And obviously there's a lot of variation across states in terms of construction costs. But the bottom line is this slide represents a trend that is unsustainable. Unsustainable because, per the slide I showed previously, we need to be getting more housing for every dollar of subsidy and incentive that we have to try to at least stem some of the overwhelming losses to the total stock that actually is available and affordable to low-income renters. That's just in everyone's interest and central to all of our mission. The second reason, though, that this is so important is at some point in time, even programs as popular and as widely supported and as demonstrably effective as the low-income housing tax credit, have to be able to demonstrate in the court of public opinion and in the political arena that they are achieving the most efficient use for taxpayers' funds. And this chart doesn't necessarily suggest that the housing credit and other affordable housing programs aren't, but members of Congress and state legislatures, governors, members of the media, and frankly, our friends and neighbors will start to wonder about the cost of affordable housing if stories appear in the press, as they have, about projects that seem to cost not only more than market rate apartment construction in that community, but more than the cost of one or even two single-family homes for sale. And of course, everyone in this conversation gets it. You really can't compare affordable housing to market rate multifamily or single-family owner-occupied homes. But the reality is most people do, and that certainly includes elected officials and members of the press. So there are always going to be important reasons why affordable apartment construction costs more than otherwise comparable market rate. And those baseline reasons are well understood, and we've dealt with them effectively in our communications and advocacy for many, many years. Affordable housing often has to set aside higher levels of reserves because that's the only way properties can be maintained, since the owner can't increase rents the way a market rate owner could. Of course, in many cases, affordable housing developments are required by law to use union labor or meet prevailing wage standards for the contractors that are producing it, not a requirement that typically impacts market rate housing and that we know can make development costs more expensive. And of course, housing finance agencies and local governments often try to accomplish multiple objectives when they finance an affordable housing project. Often it will be expected to achieve a very high level of environmental sustainability in terms of how it's built. Often they will be asked to serve as anchors of community revitalization, adaptively reusing an abandoned building, or bringing economic life to a brownfield, or providing housing in a far-flung rural area, maybe where it's hard to find workers who can actually get the project built. So we understand, and we've always been able to explain to audiences that are concerned about some cost differential between affordable housing and market rate construction. And yet, it is, again, back to our mission, back to the huge challenge that we've chosen to take on. It's critical for all of us to look for any ways that we can to bend the cost curve of housing development to produce more housing, more units for less subsidy per unit. And it's an area of very exciting policy development in housing finance agencies, where we know many of you are taking a hard look at your qualified allocation plans and your other policies that bear on development costs, and working with your development partners to really understand what's going on. Why have things all of a sudden, it seems like, gotten significantly more challenging for affordable housing development? Sure, some of the answer is because all kinds of construction have gotten more expensive since COVID, with inflation and interest rates. That's part of the answer, but it's not the only answer. And we know that affordable housing, because it receives public subsidy and taxpayer support, is going to be held to a different standard of scrutiny when it comes to costs. So that's the third challenge that I think we're, as an industry and as a community, really grappling with, and where we hope to see some progress in the years ahead. Okay, 3 challenges. Now, what are 3 positive trends and opportunities? Next slide, please. We have to start here, right? It was only a few months ago, last summer, that Congress passed the largest expansion of the low-income housing tax credit in 25 years, and really one of the most significant increases in any affordable housing program ever. We now have 12% more 9% credits to work with in every state, and of course, the threshold for receiving uncapped 4% credits in combination with bond financing has been lowered from 50% to 25%. So this is a major and massive change. The estimates of the impact and how much we can achieve will depend on many things that I will get to, but a very simple way to understand the impact and just how big a win this was for affordable housing and for the work that everyone on this webinar does is the Joint Committee on Taxation, which has to estimate the cost to the federal government of every individual provision in the tax code, and does special reports every time Congress passes a tax bill or adds or takes away some important part of the tax code. Did an estimate when the bill with the housing credit increase passed, and tentatively projects that the expansion will represent $16 billion in new federal investment for affordable housing. $16 billion, which is probably low, by the way, for reasons we can get into, but still $16 billion in new additional funding for the production and the preservation of affordable multifamily housing. By way of comparison, just to cite one example, the HOME program, which is probably, after the tax credit, the second biggest federal program, and of course, often combined with low-income housing tax credits, that's like $1 billion. billion and a quarter per year. This is $16 billion a year, at least, in new resources for affordable multifamily housing. So absolutely massive opportunity, a really great win for not just the housing finance agencies and NCSHA, but a large coalition of public, private, and nonprofit organizations that have worked for many, many years to get members of Congress in both parties, in the House and Senate, to become not just supporters of the low-income housing tax credit, but really very well-informed, passionate advocates for increasing it. The reality is, it isn't that hard to get a member of Congress to support something, to put their name behind a piece of legislation or a program by simply pointing out that it does some good in their district or their state. Most members of Congress support lots of things. It's much, much harder to turn a member of Congress who supports something into an advocate for it, into someone who will say, when it actually matters in the legislative environment in Capitol Hill, when bills are moving through Congress that could actually reach the president's desk, this is something that I care about. This is something that I want to see. I'm going to ask my leadership, even the president of the United States, to make sure it gets into this legislation that gets signed into law. That takes a lot of work. It starts with a successful program. And of course, many of you have been involved over the years, and your agencies have, in taking members of Congress to see completed low-income housing tax credit developments, to meet the residents, to see firsthand the impact on communities. And that's where it starts. And then the education of how much more a community, a district, a state needs, how much it could benefit from more of this resource, in this case, low-income housing tax credit. So that work literally has been happening for years, and it culminated this summer in a terrific development of the expansion that we're seeing. This map shows you, and it could well be out of date if some of you are thinking, hey, my state is shown in white. It shouldn't be. The states that are colored in at this point are the ones that we've verified have actually publicly communicated their new policies for optimizing the expanded housing credit resources, or have said that they expect to do so soon. NCSHA is actively surveying and in conversation with housing finance agencies about how you all are thinking about using this incredible expansion of resources, and we'll be sharing that, continuing to share that with housing finance agency staff across the country, who of course are always looking at and learning from one another and sharing with each other, one of the real strengths of the housing finance agency network. I mentioned, the impact, just how much good the housing credit increase will do, how many more units it will end up enabling HFAs to finance, is dependent on a number of things. And those are important to mention and understand because there are so many factors that bear on, exactly how impactful a given policy is going to be. The same legislation that carried the housing credit increase, the one big beautiful bill, as it's known, at least by Republicans and President Trump, had a number of other changes in the tax code that will impact over some period of time just how much affordable housing this increase in the housing credit program can generate. First and foremost, though, is the increase itself. Laws of supply and demand. Housing credits generate equity for projects in a competitive marketplace where corporate taxpayers bid for individual tax credit allocations on a per project basis. With substantially more credits now available, more supply, so to speak, the demand among the corporate institutions that provide the equity that makes this incredible public-private partnership run will need to either increase the amount that they have been investing, or other institutions, other corporate taxpayers will need to come into the market in order for prices per credit overall to remain the same. So far, it looks like prices have held pretty firm. Most industry participants think there could be some dip as demand sort of recalibrates in light of much higher supply. One really positive, important development that happened shortly after the tax bill passed that NCSHA and others have been calling for and advocating for many years is that the regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, gave those companies the green light to invest more on an annual basis in low-income housing tax credits than they had been, increased their annual cap by a significant amount. And so that's a good example of demand now increasing in light of higher supply. And so we hope to see more of that through various means, but it is somewhat TBD, particularly over the next year or two. Now, another factor that is going to bear significantly on just how much this housing credit increase translates into in terms of new units is the big, beautiful bill really wiped out and curtailed most of the existing tax credits for energy efficiency and renewable energy that had been in place for a number of years, and that in some cases, some of these credits were actually quite attractive to some of the same corporate taxpayers that buy low-income housing tax credits. In fact, over the last several years, the data was pretty clear that some of the longtime purchasers of low-income housing tax credits had actually diverted some of their equity investment from low-income housing into energy, clean energy and energy efficiency, because those credits had some financially advantageous features to these investors that even low-income housing tax credits don't. So there really was a direct impact as a result of there being different incentives available. Over the next couple of years, those are really going to ramp down substantially because of the changes in the big, beautiful bill. And so, in time, corporate investment appetite for energy could find its way into housing, and that would also be positive. There's some other things that are in the tax code and sort of broader economic forces that bear on just how much affordable housing we're going to get out of this incredible victory and increase in low-income housing tax credit. We come back to those a little bit later, but that gives you a general sense. We know this is a huge expansion of resources. It represents at least $16 billion in additional federal investment that we didn't have the year before. And the specific, the actual amount of equity and units that flow from it will become a little bit more clearer in the weeks and months to come. Last thing I'll say about the low-income housing tax credit, of course, is we're not done. We're not done advocating for improvements to the low-income housing tax credit and to other related affordable housing programs. There may be a school of thought that suggests, well, if you've achieved a big legislative accomplishment, you're sort of done for a while. We actually see it differently. We like to say that success builds on success, and that with the momentum that we have, with the support in the Republican and Democratic parties in the House and Senate, we're going to continue asking for more tax credits, more tax-exempt bonds, more home subsidies, more rental assistance. In some of these areas, as I mentioned, with respect to budget cuts, this is going to be really, really hard just to maintain current levels of funding. But in other cases, which I'm about to give some specific examples of, we think this is a good time to be in the business of advocating for more federal resources for housing. So let's go to the next slide. Here's a great picture. If we were in a room together, I would ask everyone to raise their hands if they know who the person on the left is, who the person on the right is. Probably just about all of you would be able to identify them both. They're both really well known. They're both two of the more famous members of the U.S. Senate. They each ran for president of their parties, Democrat in the case of the person on the left. Left, by the way, is my left, the woman. I'll say, if you're looking at it the other way. Republican in the case of the gentleman on the right. They are, of course, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, and Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina. Two people who have impeccable credentials in their political parties and in their political movements. Progressive in the case of Warren, and a traditional conservative in the case of Scott. They, if you looked at their voting records and their public statements over their long and incredibly accomplished careers, they probably agree on almost nothing. On not a single issue could you have found them, agreeing. But over the last year and a half, they found one, and it was housing. And both Senator Warren, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee, and Senator Scott, who's the chairman of that committee and therefore the top Republican on it, got to talking and realized that in their two states, housing affordability was a huge challenge. And there were probably any number of good ideas for helping address it and ways that the federal government could help. So they started to ask the members of their committee, the members of the Senate Banking Committee, if this was true in their states. And they heard over and over from members on both sides that, yeah, it's a big issue. And over the course of about 18 months, most of these senators put forward their ideas. And almost in every case, the Republican would have an idea that a Democrat on the committee would support, or a Democrat would propose something and they'd get a Republican colleague on the committee to co-sponsor. And so a couple of dozen bipartisan ideas for ways that the federal government could do more to help states and local communities deal with housing issues began to develop. The committee held some hearings, it did some field work, and then it started working on legislation. And this is actually how Congress is supposed to work, how it really has worked for most of its history until its recent history, in a very deliberative legislative process. This summer, the Banking Committee held a markup where they reviewed a piece of legislation more than 300 pages long with dozens of ideas that had come from members of both sides of this committee. We were all, those of us who had been advocating for various of these provisions and hopeful, optimistic that this bill would pass, we were all stunned because it passed 24-0 unanimously out of the Senate Banking Committee. Something that hadn't happened on a significant piece of housing legislation anytime in anyone's memory. The bill that passed had a number of important provisions that NCSHA specifically had championed and been working on for a long time, including reauthorization of the home program, an increase in the amount of investments in low-income housing tax credits that banks can make and get credit under certain federal regulatory treatment, a new federal program to support home repair around the country, and many, many other provisions that we support that other organizations had specifically championed. Resources to help states and cities rationalize their zoning and get rid of barriers to affordable housing construction. Incentives for the Federal Housing Administration to provide more financing for low-cost home mortgage loans. Reforms to a number of federal programs to make them less regulatorily burdensome, easier to use, less laden with red tape. On and on and on. This is the most comprehensive affordable housing bill that has passed a major Senate panel in quite some time. I guess now I'm looking at this slide and those two great senators, and I see I didn't put the name of the bill on it. It's called the Road to Housing Act. The Road to Housing Act. So really exciting to see it pass the Senate Bank Committee. Of course, that's only one stop on the way to it actually getting enacted. And some of you may have seen NCSHA had pretty closely covered this, that in another just remarkable development, the Road to Housing Act has now passed the full U.S. Senate. It was attached to a bill that passed last month to fund national defense policy, which is considered one of those must-pass pieces of legislation that Congress has to do every year. So this Road to Housing Act, this comprehensive housing bill, the likes of which we have not seen in decades, supported by both parties, has now passed the United States Senate. It's amazing. Now, the House of Representatives has to do its work on this, and it hasn't done quite as much. There are, similar to Senator Warren and Senator Scott, there are two great leaders in the House committee that deals with housing policy, Congressman Mike Flood from Nebraska and Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver from Missouri. They're also working really closely together in a bipartisan way on ideas that big shares of members in each of their parties on their committee can support, but they're not as far along as the Senate. And the House of Representatives is not going to be able, barring something unforeseen and extraordinary, is not going to be able to pass a version of the Road to Housing Act this year. But through Congressman Flood and Cleaver and many others, it is working. It is working at the committee level among members to develop legislation. It absolutely can, and we think will make some significant progress on a number of housing provisions. And there could be an opportunity as soon as next year to get comprehensive housing legislation all the way through Congress and to the president's desk. So something that we're really hopeful about and going to continue to work on. We have a summary of this bill on NCSHA's website. Really, just about everything I've talked about is available in more detail for any of you who are interested on our website. And I'll just say, to conclude the discussion of the Road to Housing Act, that just like the housing credit increase that did get over the finish line, progress to us means it's time to accelerate the efforts, not take a breather, not pull back. So we intend to work very hard with the Senate Banking Committee, with other Senate committees, and of course with the House, to continue to pass legislation, to do more on affordable housing, to build on this bipartisan momentum and awareness that housing affordability really is a huge problem that the federal government needs to play a more active and constructive role on. Next slide, please. And this is the last one, and something that among the things that gives us a lot of hope and enthusiasm, it's not just that we see Congress passing legislation and working in a bipartisan way to address affordable housing. Of course, that's really important and encouraging, but we have seen over the last several years, really, I would say dating to right before COVID, and in part, in some ways, maybe informed somewhat by the pandemic, that states have taken an unprecedented level of interest and initiative on housing issues. States, I'm talking about governors and state legislatures, who, with some very notable exceptions, for the most part, historically had not played a huge direct role in providing new resources for housing and trying to push local jurisdictions to do more for housing in terms of being creative with not just state resources, but state authorities, state-owned land and facilities, and so on. That has completely changed. Over the last 5 years or so, the amount of investment that states have made in housing absolutely dwarfs the amount that they had made probably throughout history to that point. By NCSHA's count, at least 20 states, and probably even more than that, because there's new exciting work happening every day, have in the last few years put an unprecedented amount of state funding into affordable housing. And I say affordable housing, some of it's for home ownership, some of it's for home repair, some of it's for multifamily apartment construction, some of it's for rental assistance. It's all types of housing programmatic response to housing affordability needs. And the states that are doing this are in every part of the country, red and blue, so-called red and blue states, states with different makeups in their legislatures and their governors. And the trend is only continuing to build. Now, in almost every case, the Housing Finance Agency, of course, is the delivery system, is the engine that is going to put the new state resources to work. And that's a newish development because, again, with some notable exceptions, housing finance agencies have not historically played a big role in delivering state resources for housing, in part because few states are actually putting significant money on a regular basis, with the exception of state housing trust funds, which are sort of separately authorized. For the most part, you didn't see a lot of new housing funding, new housing thinking, new housing activity coming from state governors and legislatures. And so housing finance agencies were principally involved in utilizing their own resources, their tax-exempt bond authority, their mortgage-backed securities, and serving as the administrator of federal resources. Well, that's changed, and it's incredibly exciting. And one dimension of it that we're especially enthusiastic about is the development of new financing models. So some of the state investment that we're seeing is coming through, as I mentioned, in various forms of subsidy, grants, and rental assistance. It's all very important. But on a more innovative front, we are seeing the creation in states around the country with housing finance agencies as the thought partner, as the financing enterprise for new types of financing for affordable housing. Affordable meaning serving low-income households and also mixed and middle-income developments. And so this slide here from the Center for Public Enterprise, which has been a key resource to housing finance agencies around the country, and this shows market rate capital stack, kind of typical market rate of financing structure, a typical traditional affordable structure with long housing tax credit scores playing that key role. And then in the middle, what they call a public developer, although it's not called that everywhere, where some form of a mortgage, the debt is there, as it always is. And then the new tool, the innovation of the revolving loan fund, some form of capital provided by the public sector, often state governments, through housing finance agencies, that serves as a ultra low interest form of debt that enables projects to serve at least some share of low income households as part of the total occupancy of the building, and that pays back over time, so more financing can be provided. NCSHA's got information, as does the Center for Public Enterprise, on the states that have launched these kinds of programs. And there are many others where there is an active discussion happening between the Housing Finance Agency, other state agencies, governor, state legislators. I'll say, just as a footnote, that while we're talking about multifamily financing here today, there's a similar and parallel level of innovation going on with housing finance agencies around the country, providing financing for affordable starter home, single family owner occupied housing, where again, governors, state legislators, housing finance agencies are getting together and saying, look, this is just a huge part of our housing affordability challenge. We can't wait on the federal government to do the right thing here. We need to do something at the state level. And so that's a trend that we're continuing to see, not just on the multifamily side, but also on the single family side. It looks like I'm right at the 5 minutes before our session ends mark. So I will stop and turn it back to our hosts at ProLink with, again, my thanks for the invitation to participate in today's conference, and especially my thanks to all the housing finance agency staff who are watching, it's really just our honor at NCSHA among our small team to work for you and represent you. And you really do inspire us in what you're doing every day. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Stockton. We really appreciate those insights. Some good opportunities in our future, as we've seen illustrated on the last 3 slides here. Are there any questions, Sam, that have come through the Q&A before we move on?
Hi, Bree. Currently, there are no outstanding questions.
Okay. If anybody would like to submit questions, please feel free to do so. We can always follow up or ask Stockton to respond after the